Hello everybody, Roguey here and welcome back to another Dead by Daylight video. Today we're going to be doing something a bit different to the highlight videos I've been doing lately. Since we had such a good response to the how to counter every killer video a few months back, we're going to be switching up a bit today. Now we're actually going to be looking at a couple of tips of how to use every killer in Dead by Daylight up as far as Nemesis. These will tend to be general bits of advice on the killer and their power, which should hopefully be of use to people looking to start learning, or maybe even something experienced players can learn from too. With that being said, I hope you enjoy the video. So the first killer we're going to be looking at is the Trapper. So the first little thing I've got with the Trapper is that you can actually use the trap preview to identify good trap locations. It'll actually show you exactly how much of the trap will be shown when you actually place it down. So on specific maps like Gideon's or on Springwood, there's actually certain spots in like doorways that you can actually hide the trap almost completely, which will make it more difficult for the survivors to locate. Also, try to avoid placing any traps in the middle of the pallets, as they can be dropped and avoided completely by a survivor, especially at longer loops where you'd actually be heavily punished for it. So with the Wraith, the first bit of advice I'd have is if you're approaching an unsuspecting survivor, particularly at the start of the game when they don't know which killer you're going to be, if you can uncloak out of the line of sight of the survivor, they won't actually know which direction to run, which could actually help with you catching up and getting your first hit. Also, you can actually use the quote-unquote windstorm buff that the Wraith have gotten a few patches ago to actually gain a large amount of distance with your lunge as you uncloak to actually get hits on survivors around certain loops. So with the Hillbilly, the first bit of advice I have is that if you're actually trying to chainsaw a survivor at point blank range, what I tend to do is actually aim my camera lower towards like kind of their lower body. So it actually makes it easier for me to track survivors and actually get the chainsaws to actually connect. And also another bit of advice is as you're chainsawing across the map, I actually use Q and E, but you can actually use any two keys of your choice to actually turn left and turn right. It just makes it a lot more consistent, a lot easier to use versus using the mouse to actually turn. So with the Nurse, a lot of the gameplay that comes from her is just learning about her blink distancing with muscle memory. So that's something that you'll just get over time. The first bit of advice that I actually have for actually using her power is try to avoid using her second blink unless you're actually in a chase. Because there'll actually be less blinks that you're using at any one time, there'll actually be less fatigue time added to it. And it also means that when you actually need to use your second blink to either catch or chase the survivor, you'll actually have them available more often than not, especially since the second blink will actually have less distance than the first blink does. Alright, so with Myers, the first bit of advice I have is, particularly at the start of the game when you're trying to go from tier 1 to tier 2, you want to try and get as close as possible to survivors before stalking. This because stalking is actually based on the proximity between you and the survivors, so the closer you are, you actually gain more stalk from them, which actually means that you can actually get to tier 2 and even then tier 3 a lot quicker. And also another bit of advice, and this is kind of the most general advice you can have for Myers, is try to maintain your stalk as close to proccing to tier 3 as you possibly can. And then once you actually have a healthy survivor, you can actually proc on them and get an easy down and win the chase fast. Particularly with things like save the best for last, you can actually use this on the Obsession, so you only lose 2 tokens instead of losing 4. So with the Hag, a lot of her power is literally just in knowing where to place traps, particularly over the course of the game, and trying to like set up kind of trap spots where no matter where the survivor goes, you're just going to be able to get them. So the first thing is just to place traps strategically around loops so that as the survivor's running, either it's going to be a case of you just keep following, you M1 them, or you teleport to the trap and you hit them, particularly either side of a pallet, because if they vault it, they'll have the trap there, but then also if they try and fake it, you can just hit them then. And as well, over the course of the game, trying to trap the more popular spots for survivors to run through to be able to teleport to them and keep them under pressure throughout the game. So with the Doctor, the first bit of advice is just to do with his static shock. So basically what you want to do, especially going around certain pallet loops, is try to time your shock so it hits the survivor about half a second before they can actually drop the pallet. This basically means that you'll actually deny it completely, since even as they're shocked, they can actually still drop the pallet instantly. So you actually need to like have a little bit of leeway after the shock before they can actually be denied dropping any pallets. And to follow on from that, you can actually use Static Blast to identify nearby survivors when you're going for pickups. And especially towards the end game, if survivors are playing a bit stealthier, you can just use it to blast an area. Unless they're in a locker, they're going to scream and identify the location, unless they also have Calm Spirit on. So with the Huntress, the first bit of advice I have for her is that if you're actually having the option of either M1ing a survivor or hatchet hitting them, hatchets have less cooldown when actually being successful than a normal N1 does, so try to use that to your advantage to try and land a hatchet, and then you'll actually be able to catch up to them quicker afterwards. And then also, if you're actually going around a pallet loop and you know for a fact the survivor is going to be dropping the pallet, try to aim your pallet for just above where the dropped pallet would be, because a lot of times the survivor will actually drop the pallet and then instantly crouch to try and avoid any kind of like shoulder or head height shots. So if you actually aim just a little bit lower, even if they crouch, you're still going to hit them and get the down. So with Bubba, when you're using your chainsaw, it's going to be quite hard to actually keep an eye on your power to kind of see when your next charge is going to be needed. So if you actually work out how many times Bubba swings his chainsaw before it actually goes into cooldown, you can use that to kind of figure out when you need to activate the next charge to be able to follow on to a survivor and get the down. And just remember as well that there are some add-ons that do affect that, so just keep an eye on that. If you're using some add-ons that affect it, it will be different if you then swap your add-ons. And then also, if a survivor jumps into a locker, you can actually ram the locker with your chainsaw to go into a tantrum. Now, not only would it hold them there for a while, but the cooldown after exiting tantrum is so short that a lot of survivors don't know how to time it properly to be able to jump out and avoid being grabbed. And just remember as well that there are some add-ons that affect the tantrum time as well, so a lot of times they'll actually extend it, which will actually catch a lot of survivors out if they try to avoid it, because they'll actually jump straight into your chainsaw. Alright, so with Freddy, a lot of his snares and pallets are kind of generic and people tend to know what to do with those, so I'm kind of be actually focusing on his teleporting power. So you can actually like fake teleport to gens as you're like chasing another survivor, because that will just provide random gen pressure. It will take a survivor off a gen for like a few seconds at a time, which over the course of a game can add up and be quite good. But then also, if you're actually going towards a specific generator that you know a survivor's on, you can actually fake teleport towards it, because a lot of times the survivor will get off the gen and start running to a different direction, which a lot of times will actually be directly towards you, so it'll actually help you with kind of mind gaming them in that way. Alright, so with the pig, she has two different powers here. So basically the first one is going to be looking at her ambush. So what you're going to need to do is just try and utilize ambush to get hits around unsafe loops. Particularly if you go into your ambush and you fake one direction and then just quickly switch to the other one, you'll actually catch people jumping over pallets and get hits a lot of time. And also, if you're chasing your obsession, you have Save the Best for Last, you can actually use your ambush to avoid losing any Save the Best for Last stacks, because it's counted as a not normal hit, or not a basic attack, sorry. So you actually don't lose any stacks from it. And then on the other side of it, with the bear traps, try to utilize the bear traps to optimally keep survivors off gens. If you just constantly are putting traps on, nobody's doing a gen, it's helpful, yes, because there's no one doing a gen, but at the same point, you might also be able to provide more pressure on the survivors by having some people do a gen, activating the bear traps, and then they're under a lot more pressure to try and get the traps off. So really try and think over the course of the game about when you should be putting the bear traps on. Alright, so with the clown, he actually had a remake not too long ago, which actually gave him an additional kind of niche to his power. So now you actually have two bottle types, one which slows survivors and one that actually speeds anything up that runs through it, yourself and survivors included. So trying to use the two bottle types to slow survivors and give yourself a speed boost around loops. The kind of most efficient way of doing this is to try and have control of the pallet, invigorate yourself on the pallet, and then throw a intoxication bottle on one side of the pallet, and then just rotate around, so that way you're going to be fast, but they're going to be slowed down through the gas cloud. And a lot of times you'll actually get a hit on them through that way. So with the spirit, the most important thing with her when you're using your phase especially is trying to utilize surrounding noises to try and find survivors during the phase. Typically the most common noises that you're going to hear would be footsteps, breathing, and grass moving. They would be kind of the most common noise you're going to hear. Alongside that, if they do not actually have Iron Will on, you'll actually hear all of the moans of pain as well. So a lot of times people will actually get a regular M1 hit and then follow up with the phase to get the down on them, because you'll actually be able to catch up and get that a lot quicker. So with the Legion, the first bit of advice I have is just probably to pick a better killer, because they're actually kind of underpowered at the moment. But aside from that, if you have a survivor in deep wounds and you want to get out of your power to follow up and get the down on them, being stunned by a pallet would actually save you time and actually make you be able to move a lot quicker than if you're actually coming out of fatigue. Now bear in mind, this is with no add-ons, no fatigue reductions, but it actually does save you time, and it also removes a pallet from the map. And then on the flip side as well, if you're actually about to exit Feral Frenzy, you don't have the option for the pallet, you can actually use the lunge from Feral Frenzy to gain a good amount of distance, and it costs you like maybe like a fraction of a second, but you'd actually get a lot more distance for it as well. So with the plague, the very first thing that came into my head, because it's something that happens quite a lot, is if you're in a 1v1 scenario where they need to get one of the doors open, you can actually use the Vile Purge on a door, and you'll actually know exactly when that door is starting to be worked on, and you can actually just rotate between the doors, like use Vile Purge on one, control the other one, and if they start getting sick, you know that they're working on that other door. And on the flip side as well, over the course of the game, use the Vile Purge to actually injure the survivors rather than make them sick and then hit them, because by doing this, you'll actually prevent them from gaining any of the speed boosts that they get from an M1 hit, which means you'll actually be able to follow up and just get the down pretty quick as well. On the flip side as well, when you're using either Vile Purge or Corrupt Purge, shaking your mouse from left to right as you're actually spraying it, on controller it'd be the analog stick, would actually give more of a spread on the purge as it's going out, which makes it a lot more successful when trying to hit a survivor if they're dodging left or right. Alright, so with Ghostface, the most common thing to use with his power that a lot of people would do is to activate his Ghost Shroud or Inner Loop to remove the red stain, and it makes it harder for survivors to track you, particularly over certain loops, because Ghostface isn't a tool killer. He's actually very good at especially being able to use his crouch to move to one side of the loop without the survivor knowing, particularly with the Ghost Shroud activated. And on the flip side as well, if you're actually struggling to find survivors at any point in the game, you can actually activate your Ghost Shroud, and if anyone's looking at you, you actually get the detection to indicate which direction they're looking at you from, so you can actually go over and find them. Alright, so with Demogorgon, he's had a lot of changes recently with his add-ons, which has a lot of people playing him. The most common thing that people do now is, as you're turning a corner, where particularly, to use an example for like the Killer Shack, as you kind of turn the doorway, a lot of people power up their shred, so if someone's going through the window, they can shred and get the hit. And if they fake the window and they go to the paddock, they can still shred and get the hit, because he gets a ridiculous amount of distance with it. So it's very good for being able to like catch people out before they can get to a paddock or a window and get the free hit. And then on the flip side as well, try to place your portals near generators and other objectives like your totems, things like that, over the course of the game, because once that portal is actually active, anytime you power up your shred, you'll get Killer Instinct on any survivors that are located near those, so you can actually have more information, and you can use those portals to actually traverse the map faster for more pressure. Alright, so with Dione, a lot of the information a lot of people give you is just try to get an M1 hit as quickly as you can to try and get into his power faster, but I mean that's typically what people would be trying to do anyway. The first thing I'm just going to say on it is, when you're using your Demon Rush, as you're chasing a survivor, particularly around loops, try to angle yourself when going around the corners. That way you'll actually be going as directly towards the survivor as possible, so you can actually try and get the hit on them. Particularly, a lot of people would kind of compare it to like Curve Billy. Like, you're basically trying to work it so the end goal of you turning that corner is going to be in as direct a path to the survivor to try and get the hit on them. On the flip side as well is, if you're actually just going for a held M1 attack on them, it actually has a larger lunge range than other killers' regular M1 hits, and you still get the dying state inflicted on any survivors that are hit by it. And on the flip side as well, you can actually hit multiple people with this attack. And now my absolute favorite killer in the world. Basically, press escape, click quick game, go to the Steam store, buy Hunt Showdown, install it, play it, love it, never go back to playing Death Singer if you really want to play a Western person with a gun. But if you really insist on playing him, as you actually have a survivor speared and you're reading them, if you actually walk backwards as you're reading them, they can't move left or right as much, so they can't kind of hide themselves behind the paddock more often. If they are stuck behind something, typically you'd want to move forward to try and get as much distance as you can. Alright, so with the Executioner, typically you want to use your Rites of Punishment to leave a trail throughout pallets and loops so full survivors become tormented if they want to loop it. Particularly, this works a lot of the time at Killer Shack, because they are kind of bottlenecks that people have to go through if they want to utilize the loop. And also on the flip side, Punishment of the Damned, which is his ranged hit, can hit people through pallets and through windows, but it cannot travel over holes in the floor. Particularly if you look at maps like the game, a lot of those drop down areas, you can't actually use your power through those to hit people on the other side. So with the Blight, I know he has a lot of techniques like J-flicking and things like that, but this would kind of be more basic for people to just kind of get introduced to him. So you can actually utilize his Lethal Rush to break pallets without having to suffer as much of a penalty. Lethal Rush is any of his rushes after the initial one. So you do have to slam into a wall or a pallet or something else before you can actually use Lethal Rush, but you can actually use that to actually break pallets. And typically a lot of people would actually use his rush similarly to Hillbilly's Chainsaw to try and get around the map faster. And then we have the Twins, which my first advice would be uninstall the game. It's nothing against people that play Twins, it's literally just her power typically goes for a lot of slugging, and I kind of don't enjoy that. But typically with the twins, probably the best bit of advice I can give on them, aside from like using Victor to go and just down everyone, would be if you actually have someone downed as Charlotte and you have Victor ready to be released, you can actually release Victor and then actually switch back to Charlotte, and Victor will actually detect any nearby survivors via Killer Instinct, so you'll know if someone's trying to get a flashlight save or a pallet save or things like that. So with the Trickster, it's actually kind of hard to judge him or give advice on him because he is a very simplistic killer. It's literally just knives go burr. But typically with his main event, it recently got buffed, so you now have a 30-second window to use it rather than a 10-second window. So typically with him, you'd want to try and utilize your main event when you're able to secure at least one down with it. Now, when I say one down with it, I literally mean a healthy survivor to a down survivor, or try and get 2 survivors just downed within the same window. Because he does suffer a little bit of fatigue time afterwards, so typically that would be the best kind of use for it, particularly with the extra window to kind of try and time it as well as you can. And finally, that brings us to Nemi Doodah. Now, with Nemesis, typically you want to try and gain tier 2 of the power as soon as possible, either via hitting survivors or hitting zombies with it. Now, once you actually get to tier 2, you can actually start breaking pallets with the power. Now, as you're kind of turning a corner, if survivors drop the pallet, you can hit them over the pallet. If they vault the pallet, you can hit them over the pallet. If you do miss them completely, you can actually still break the pallet, so you actually save time on like having to use the break pallet action. And typically you can actually start chasing them a lot faster than other killers would. Aside from say like Hillbilly or Bubba, who are chainsawing from a distance and then going in to hit the pallet, he actually does break pallets fast as have other killers. And also because of the extra range on it, typically there will be times where you'd actually be able to hit people over pallets before where an M1 wouldn't, because an M1 would actually be cancelled by a pallet stuns or things like that, but the power can actually just hit straight through it. Alright, and that's going to be it for the video today, guys. I hope there was some stuff in there that would be of help to some of you. Hopefully I am going to be trying to make more kind of little tidbit videos like this where I do kind of talk about how to play people or like use them well, rather than like telling people a specific play style or what perks to use, because I feel like that's something that everyone should kind of work out their own style. But I do kind of want to try and get more into making these kind of videos where I do talk about some killers. But I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to drop in the comments anything you think I could do better or any kind of thoughts on it. And if you did enjoy, please subscribe, drop a like, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night, guys.